practice resources, this being our second echo, we got a great intro last time to just pharmacogenomics in general. And I thought that just following that up with some resources that I use in my practice may be beneficial for those of you, especially if you are just sort of starting to dabble in the field. So I have no disclosures to report. And this is just a brief list of some of the guidelines and resources that I'm going to be talking about today. So we're going to start off with CPIC, the Clinical Pharmacogenetics Consortium. If you have dabbled in pharmacogenomics at all, you probably recognize the name CPIC, an international consortium, multidisciplinary, and has a great goal of addressing barriers to clinical implementation of pharmacogenetics tests by creating, curating, posting freely available, peer-reviewed, evidence-based, updatable, and detailed gene drug clinical practice guidelines. And I think very important to note that CPIC will be helpful if you have pharmacogenetic results available to use, help you determine what recommendations you might be able to make, but not as a resource if you're trying to determine when to order a pharmacogenetics test or not. They are indexed in, the guidelines are indexed in PubMed and endorsed by American Society of Health System Pharmacists and published in ASCPT's journal CPNT. There's a website there, but I'm going to take you to the next slide, which starts to show a screenshot of what the website looks like. And so the top red box highlighting where you could click for guidelines, and then you can either just scroll down the list or you can search and it will pull up any guideline that matches the search. So if you typed clopidogrel in the search box, it would bring up the highlighted in red their guideline, or else you can just scroll down to find it as well. It's fairly intuitive. It's really nice because it highlights any updates made since the last guideline publication. There's a lot of really good data in CPIC to use. So there's, within the guidelines, there's tables and figures that help with assignment of likely phenotypes based on genotypes. They provide recommendations, algorithms for suggested clinical actions. And if you check out the supplemental section, it is very robust. It has commonly tested variants of association between the variants and enzyme activity. You can find tables that show the frequencies of alleles in major race or ethnic groups. Also, the predicted metabolizer phenotypes based on genotype provides evidence. And also, if you scroll way to the bottom, it'll link out to any original guidelines or publications linked to that drug gene pair. Next up, we have the Dutch Pharmacogenetics Working Group, or DPWG. Again, another multidisciplinary group. Has some recommendations that overlap with CPIC, not all of them. The recommendations can be found on the KNMP website. However, I've personally found it a little difficult to navigate. Some of it's in English, some of it is in Dutch. And so when trying to utilize the Dutch guideline recommendations, I just utilize PharmGKB, which is a resource that I will talk about shortly. And so the FDA also has a few resources available as far as pharmacogenomics. One of them is this table of pharmacogenomic biomarkers in drug labeling. And this contains information that's found in drug labels. So label information includes specific recommendations for some of the interactions, but not all of them. And if you are specifically looking for a recommendation related to pharmacogenomics, it's not always going to be in the same section of the label. And so don't just check one part of the label and expect that you would find pharmacogenetic recommendations there at all times. They can appear in different sections. The biomarkers in the table include, but are not limited to, germline or somatic gene variants. And this can be, interactive on the web, but you can also download it as a table to utilize if you prefer it in that form. The FDA also has a table of pharmacogenetic associations, which you can see it really gives a nice description about the table, divides it into different sections, where there's a section for data supports therapeutic management recommendations, another section that data indicates potential impact on safety or response, and another section about the data demonstrating a potential impact on PK properties only. And the fact that the FDA has included a particular gene-drug interaction does not necessarily mean that the FDA advocates for using a pharmacogenetic test before prescribing that medication, but they are just providing information available and dividing it out into a couple of different sections. Also, very important to note that FDA is reminding us that genetics is only a part of the puzzle. There's other label information, other pieces as clinicians that we need to consider when taking account our recommendation and the clinical picture. So the next resource I want to talk about is PharmGKB, and this is a resource that I utilize almost on a daily basis, the pharmacogenomics knowledge base. And when I am, introducing my students to doing pharmacogenetic reviews, I kind of refer to PharmGKB as the one-stop shop, because it contains information from CPIC and Dutch Working Group and FDA, in addition to others. Again, I find it fairly intuitive to navigate through PharmGKB. You can access at that website. There is a nice search bar that you can utilize, and it does, once you start to type something, it does try, it's intuitive and usually can predict what you are, or suggest at least what you may be trying to type. And so you can search in a variety of different ways. And in this screenshot, I have just searched using the medication name, which is the most common way that I tend to utilize this resource. And so once you are in that specific medication page, you can see blue dots. A blue dot would indicate that there is something in that category, some information that you could find by clicking. And so clicking on prescribing info would be a quick way to identify guidelines associated. Clicking on a drug label annotations would bring you, for example, to FDA labeling excerpts. And so if you were to click on prescribing info, you could see that it links you to the guidelines. So CPIC, the Dutch Working Group, you can see it would also list like no recommendation per the Dutch Working Group for CYP2C19 based on amitriptyline. But you could go ahead and click details, or go ahead and click the blue hyperlink to get you further into what what those guidelines say from CPIC, for example. And so if we were to click on CPIC, it would bring us to the CPIC related page. And this is just such a friendly resource, in my opinion, because it has this beautiful drop-down menu where you can enter in the genotype information. And once you enter that genotype information in, then it's able to tell you what the phenotype is, activity score, for example, if 2D6 is involved, the classification of evidence, and the recommendation, including implications and comments. And if you were to continue to scroll down further, you would find tables from outside of or from within the guidelines, and more information. So if you just wanted to see more more of like, well, what is the recommendation for intermediate versus poor, instead of just entering in specific genotypes. You could do that by scrolling down. But if you have specific information, the drop-down menus I find to be very helpful and time efficient. And then if you were to click on drug label annotations, you can see it lists that there is something from the FDA has classified as actionable PGx, and it's an annotation from the FDA label. It gives a summary in addition to the annotation, which includes an excerpt right out of the label, which is, also really handy and time efficient, so that you don't have to go digging through the whole label. It kind of provides you the area and what the label says regarding that specific drug gene interaction. So this section of drug label annotations would also, pull up information from not only FDA, but some other regulatory bodies as well. PharmVar, in the interest of time and just thinking about our audience, I'm not going to spend too much time on. Honestly, I don't spend a lot of time using PharmVar. In our institution, most of the time this is utilized by people in our lab, but can be, if you're really interested in the genetics of it, position shifts, mapping RS numbers, this may be a useful resource for you. And just a few screenshots from that. Each gene has its own page with information. And if you're interested, the website is there to take a look at that further if you would like. So now I'm briefly just going to mention the Flockhart table, which is a nice resource if you are looking to identify different substrates of P450, inducers, inhibitors. And I'm going to just go ahead and go to the next slide here. So navigating, you can go ahead and just search. You can scroll, you can do control find, and it does, like I said, list substrates. And the nice part of this for inhibitors is that it does attempt to qualify the amount of inhibition. So whether the inhibitor might be a strong inhibitor, moderate, weak, or still to be determined, can be helpful along those lines within the color coding included. I know that we have slated another sort of didactic talk within our ECHO session to talk about phenoconversion. So I don't want to spend too much time on this either, but I did want to mention that University of Florida has developed a CYP2D6 phenoconversion calculator. And this is just a few screenshots from that calculator. So entering the CYP2D6 allele information that you have, but then it gives you the ability to select other medications that the patient is on that may be, for example, CYP2D6 inhibitors, and then providing you with the activity score and the related phenotype related to that. So trying to provide some consistency and recommendations related to phenoconversion and inhibition. Like I said, hopefully there's more to come on that. So keep tuning into the ECHO sessions for more on that. So I know that it's a pretty quick rundown and by no means inclusive of all of the resources, but that is what I had put together for you today. And certainly welcome any questions or comments that you have related to resources discussed today.